Welcome to our podcast, You Can't Study This, your guide to understanding the paths less traveled, providing inspiration for anyone eager to see the world differently. From a childhood in the small Belgian village of Keerbergen to the front lines of global epidemics, Peter takes us on a journey through his groundbreaking work in infectious diseases. He shares how he helped identify the Ebola virus, led the fight against HIV, and tackled some of the world's biggest public health challenges. In this episode, we explore his relentless curiosity, his passion for justice, lessons of leadership, and how his work has saved millions of lives.
You guys study this!
Hi, Peter.
Hello, hi everybody.
Thank you for taking the time in your, we know you have a busy schedule, but thank you for taking the time to come onto the podcast with us and talk to us about your life, your experience. I want to start off with just jumping back into the past a bit. And we were wondering, what made a young man in his 20s hop onto a plane to Africa and want to discover a new and deadly virus?
To be honest, I don't know, but I grew up in Keerbergen, which in these days there was no lake, no golf course and so on. It was quite a small village, and I grew up in the forest. And when I was, I think, 12 or so, I had one goal in life, and that was get out of here. I wanted to see the world. That was my motivation. And but that combined with a strong interest in science, I have a great degree of curiosity. Why is things happening? So after my medical studies in Ghent, I started working at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp with the goal of, at the same time, become a specialist in infectious diseases and microbiologist. So because you need to master some subject, but on the other hand, also I saw that as a stepping stone for working abroad. And when in 1976, 2 years after I had graduated from medical school, we got in Antwerp a thermos with 2 glass vials. Were dropped there at the reception by a pilot from Sabena, that doesn't exist anymore, coming from Kinshasa, of a country that has changed name also. It was then Zaire, now it's Democratic Republic of Congo. We isolated what is now known as the Ebola virus. We were the first ones to isolate it, to see it, with a whole team, with Patijn and Guido van der Groen. But it's only in Atlanta, in Georgia, the US, that they could demonstrate it was really a new virus. I got very excited. I mean, not only when you're in this, let's say, topic and business, finding a new virus is, of course, very exciting. But I was mostly interested in knowing what does it do to people, how is it transmitted, and I wanted to go to where it was, to Zaire. And but in the beginning, they said that that was not possible. But then when an international team arrived in Kinshasa from the US and from the World Health Organization, someone from France, from the Institut Pasteur, Belgium thought that we also should be there. And so I volunteered, because there were no many volunteers, I can tell you that. And so that was my first time in Africa, in Kinshasa, and in about 48 hours I was I lived there in Antwerp, and went from there to the middle of the equatorial province, in the middle of the epidemic. And I never really thought about it, I just wanted to do that. This was for me so obvious. It's not that I'm a risk taker. For example, I'm scared to ski because I think it's too high risk. I've seen too many people became paralyzed and all that. But that is the kind of thing that, it changed my life also. But I had already worked for a travel agency, going 1 month to Morocco, 1 month to Turkey. So again, it was not new, but this was an extreme case, that's for sure.
Yeah. What went through your mind when you came back? Like when you touched ground in Brussels, coming back from such a trip, what was the feeling you got from that?
Well, I was supposed to go for 1 week. That was my ordre de mission, as they call it in these days, and stayed for more than 2 months. And I loved it. I mean, it was pretty stressful because we were confronted with death and with In the beginning, we didn't know how this virus is transmitted, and that's quite essential, not only for how to stop the spread of it, but also to protect yourself, particularly since something that killed 9 out of 10 people. It's a pretty deadly virus. So I got a real taste for investigating epidemics, but also I was confronted with extreme poverty, the
Yeah.
way people were living. I knew this theoretically, but I'd never seen it. When I came back, I said, okay, this is really what I want to do. It's on the one hand working on, infectious diseases, epidemics, and so on, but also dealing with the inequalities in terms of, let's say, health, because that's my field. But there's of course much broader than that. And and also something on the more positive side, to say so. I was always impressed by the how these very poor people, they came out of a hut, how clean they were. Everything was so clean, and kind of always trying to find a solution and something positive. And I love the music. I mean, you know, the Lingala, the Congo music.
Muchos importantes.
Yes, I still love it. And I actually got to know quite a few musicians in Kinshasa later
Okay.
on, in the real Matonge, not the one in Brussels.
The real Matonge.
The real Place de la Victoire and so on, where there is a monument aux musiciens morts, but that is mort du sida. There's many died from AIDS, and I got to know them, and I still love it.
That's amazing. If we fast forward a bit, because now after so many years, a lot has changed, but diseases are still around. Many pandemics have passed us. What do you see? What is the biggest challenge nowadays for longevity? So we're living longer, more years, but does that mean better years? I don't know. How do you look at that?
Yeah, now that I just turned 76, I become more and more interested, of course, in long life, longevity. I continue to be interested in epidemics and infectious diseases, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, just name it. But and they will always be there. We will always have some epidemic, because these are viruses that circulate in nature and animals and so on, and now and then they jump on and infect us. But the good news is that we all live much longer than ever in history. We can also, like in Belgium, we can expect to live over 80, and even in sub-Saharan Africa, where if you make it to 5 years or so, your life expectancy is better than it used to be here around the World War II or in the 50s. So huge progress, and that's good news. The bad news is that we live longer, but we've added years to our life, but not life to our years, in the sense that often the last years we are not in good health, chronic infections, the chronic respiratory problems, diabetes, heart problems. And so for me, a challenge is to make sure that that we die healthy. That's my ambition, to die healthy, and we get old. My parents died at 96, so I hope I will make it and another 20 years. But also that in our society, we kind of throw away older people. We put them in care homes, and we saw with the COVID epidemic what that means. There was enormous mortality there. And so we need a positive aspect, a positive approach, not about saying aging and only the problems and, but I learned that in Singapore and in Japan, which are where the people live even longer than we do. They have the longest life expectancy on Earth. And they are taking a positive aspect. They say how to continue to involve and include the elderly, how to keep people healthy. It's because the traditional societies, you were accepted in your family and you had 3 generations in every family. Today, okay, there are far fewer children, and we've changed, So that's something that I'm now concerned about. Plus, it's also not only a health issue, but a major economic issue. On the outside, there's loneliness and so on, plus all the diseases. But we, at the current rate, it's just not possible to pay for pensions for so long, and that's a reality. Yeah? And I know people don't like to hear that, but it doesn't mean you have to work full time for all the time. But in these countries, they try to adapt the economy so that there are part-time jobs and things that you can add, both to have some income, but also to be part of a community and to have a sense in life. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for for our world at the moment.
And we speak a lot about challenges, we speak a lot about problems, and we also speak a lot about positivity. If you have to pick one of your hardest battle that you had to fight, if we take HIV/AIDS for a moment, those are topics, those are things that you need to align with the people and make a big change to get somewhere where people get vaccines, where people get medicine, where people get help. What are one of the biggest challenges that you went through?
Yeah, a hard choice, I must say. I have quite a dictionary of
track
big
records.
challenges. I would say let's start with HIV.
Yes.
We're going back now to the early 80s, so that's 45 years ago. And when originally HIV/AIDS was discovered in gay men in the US and then in Europe, but in Antwerp, where I was then working at the Institute of Tropical Medicine, we were starting to see more and more patients who died, all that, from Central Africa, both Africans and expatriates, so people who could afford to come to Belgium for medical care. Selection, of course. A big difference with what we were seeing in the local population with AIDS, and that was described, is that we saw 1/3 of these patients were women. And I said, I could never understand why a virus would care about the sexual orientation of a human host. That is coming from our mind, but you always have to think. I always try to think like the others, in this case, the virus. And what's the purpose in life is to find a host to survive, because viruses cannot survive just without living cells. And so then that's sex between two people. And so I went to Kinshasa, and I went back because in Hospital Mamayemo, which was one of the biggest hospitals in Africa, public hospital. And what I saw is that with my friend Dr. Capita, who was head of internal medicine, and he had already noticed that there was something new coming. And the wards of internal medicine for men and for women were full with fairly young people, in these days, my age, and they were dying.
Yes.
We were dying, and that was AIDS. And I said, I had my what we call aha-erlebnis. This is a big epidemic. This was before it was known. And then, so that's how I started to get into HIV and AIDS. And then a few years later, I became head of the UNAIDS. So that was the United Nations organization that was coordinating and leading the AIDS efforts against AIDS all over the world. And what were the big? And then I come to the challenges. The challenges, and I did it because I wanted to deal with the challenges. One, denial. Yeah, no, it's not our problem. It was not only in Africa, but a bit everywhere. Stigmatization, because it's about sex. Even worse, about homosexuals, sex. The term LGBTQ, etc., didn't even exist in these days.
No.
We talked about gay men, and also I was really very upset about this denial, when every year more and more people would die. At some point, we are more than 2 million people every year would die from AIDS. You tend to forget that because now we have treatment. In these days, no treatment. So my challenge was to put this on the agenda, not of doctors and all that, but of, at the top level, the presidents, the prime ministers, businesses, churches, and all that. And that was a tough battle. And I also felt that even working on AIDS, you were stigmatized. you get comments, yeah, he must be gay because he works on AIDS and this
It's
kind of
yes.
things, but it's just in
Yeah.
general. And you
It
have
feels
to,
absurd now, but yeah.
yeah, and these days was quite different. Let's not forget that even in Belgium, homosexuality was still illegal until, I can't remember when the laws changed, but it must have been like around 1970 or so.
It's
That's
not that far. Yeah, it's not that
not
long
100 years
ago.
ago. Very
No.
recent.
No, yeah.
And so it was to go to, to get that, how to say, over this denial. And then there were extreme cases. On the one hand, you had a country like China, where they said, no, we have no problem because it doesn't fit into
In
the
their ideal
in the
world.
communist type of world, that kind of behavior. But there I could convince them, and that was through, in each country you have other systems. In China, you need to influence the Communist Party. And so at some point I even addressed the Central Party School of the Communist Party. I think I was the first non-communist leader who did that. And once they took the decision, they went for it. So that was good. But then they also had continuing denialists, President Thabo Mbeki from South Africa. He did not believe that HIV exists. He thought it was all poverty. It was kind of a conspiracy of, the Western pharmaceutical industry or so against Africans, etc., etc. And of course, there was, in some of the comments and some of the approaches, there was definitely plain racism in there, subconsciously or not. But South Africa is a country with the biggest problem. Even today, they have about 6.8 million people living with HIV out of about 50 plus
Still,
million.
well, yeah.
Yeah, huge. But now they're on treatment. But there, the problem was that the president himself, who is a very smart man and has done a lot of good things, but he didn't believe that exists. And so that held up the introduction of life-saving treatment. And that was a tough challenge because, I think I can convince, I went to see from the Pope to the imams to just the Buddhist leaders to the Coptic Pope and what have you, and business people and so on. But when someone is with you and says the earth is flat, by when, so I honestly don't know how to deal with that. And I always try to understand and that's what we also saw with the COVID epidemic, when this movement against vaccination there, which have saved literally millions of lives. And yet there are people who say it's the vaccines who killed, etc. So it's
It's always
there
hard.
I lack imagination
Mhm.
how to deal with that.
It's
That's very
yeah.
tough.
But I think when you're trying to do something like that, you're trying to get on board not 10 people, but millions of people. So it takes time.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
in that, because you talked about you've met with a lot of leaders, a lot of decision makers, policy makers that are like very powerful in this world. And you met like global icons like Nelson Mandela. You told us that he made quite a lasting impression on you. What was it about this man that really
Stood
spoke
out.
to you?
Yeah.
Well, before I ever had met him, I, of course, had already a great respect and admiration for what he had been doing. I mean, and particularly not giving up, after 27 years in Robben Island. And so, I mean, he was, and that he had also, how to say, one of his initiatives was the Peace and Reconciliation Commission. So he said, okay, we've been fighting with each other, etc., but now we all have to live together. But it's, I met him for the first time in 1997 or 8, eight, I think, in Davos at the World Economic Forum, and then about 4 or 5 times. And yeah, he, in a sense, and this is a bit touchy feeling what I'm saying, but he really irradiates something that it's hard to describe. I mean, he has a natural authority. He is a very quiet speaker and so on. He's not like someone who's an entertainer and such, and yet everybody listens to him because he has this natural authority. But also, he had met my daughter, Sarah, at something that who works for MTV, music television in London, and they had a show with Nelson Mandela, and young people were asking. And so he had met my daughter. Every time I would meet him afterwards, he would ask her, "How is Sarah?" I don't know how we can remember that, because it's
How?
not like with some politicians who get a briefing and they said, when you meet Peter, you have to ask Sarah. But no, it was just
It was genuine.
another one who is like that is Clinton, but it's a very different category. No, I think the fact that he is very measured, determined, and he has a long-term goal and doesn't deviate from that, but also that he listens and is trying to find a solution. Of course, he's a fighter, and he paid for that. He was nearly killed. He would not give up, but he also, once he was, had the power, he said, "Okay, now we must live together." And I think that is a quality that I hope more politicians would have in our ever more polarized world. I think he should be our icon, our example.
Is that something you try to mimic as well? Like when you
Well,
meet those people?
I have no pretension that I would be like Nelson Mandela. I never had to go through such a hard time,
No, what's you're trying to change important stuff as
but
well. So you are in,
no, I mean, yes, in that sense, I always, I'm driven by, as I said, on the one hand, curiosity, that's the scientist in me. But on the other hand, also, I feel strongly that as many people as possible should benefit from the good things that technology has brought, that like treatment, and that all lives are equal. Doesn't mean that everybody is completely equal and so on. That I'm not that category. And I think diversity and inequality to a certain degree is healthy. Just imagine we would all be exactly the same. It would be pretty boring.
was
That would-
so
that would
boring.
be very,
So
very boring. And speaking about being the same, I think that creativity plays a huge role in how you approach things. I think creativity is not just something for the arts. I think it's something that is who you are. And for me, how did creativity affect your way of working?
Yeah, I think there's a combination. One, because I had to, particularly when I was working with HIV, but also at other circumstances, always to fight against the people who say, "Oh, we've always done it this way," or
Yeah.
"This is not possible. I've tried it, forget it." I mean, that kind of attitude, which I find um, more common in Europe than in the States, for example, or in Asia. But so then, okay, you can. What are the options then? You can go for a frontal attack, and then it's unlikely to win, but you can have your 5 minutes of glory and so on. Or I try to think of other ways that will take them either by surprise or, alternative ways. And for example, when again on HIV, when the whole medical community and the ministers of health, they didn't want to deal with this. Okay, I said, fine. What matters in the world at the end of the day is the economy, is money, and is security. So we redefine it. And I went to the UN Security Council and peacekeeping operations and with the military, and then to the World Economic Forum and business, and demonstrated this is affecting them. And it's only then that the health folks came on board, ironically. But also it's... like I mentioned, my daughter, MTV, okay? Since you're also a creative. But what do they do? I was thinking in the late 90s that a group of people in society who were extra vulnerable and becoming infected with HIV were young people, adolescents, and so on. And what was the classic response? Okay, messages, you should not do that, go use a condom, be faithful, all that. All things that are correct, but of course, who cares? And and so I said, what are in these days, I'm talking about, again, 25 years ago, I looked and I said, okay, but who reaches the most young people in the world? In these days, that was MTV. They had up to 300 audience per day, all over the world, because they're quite global, even if it's an American company. But they have local
Yeah.
VJs and all
Yeah.
that, and they will just go in their language and what in India or in South Africa, Nigeria, just name it, or in Europe. And so I went to see the president of MTV, and then we discussed, and we hit it off also, I must say. And yeah, we had a good meal and a good bottle of wine, and so then they started um, a program called the Staying Alive Foundation, and where they're using the MTV approach, shows and lots of music and et cetera, et cetera. And that led to programs called, well, it's a series, Sugar, from Sugar Daddy,
Yeah.
Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, and each time made by locals, with the local accents, but also, like, I discovered the terminology of relations and of sex is very different from one place to another. Even
Yeah,
in,
very.
no, it's very, there's a whole text. So that's, for me, that's a creative way of passing on message. And it was evaluated in Nigeria, and it showed that young people who were watching these shows, they would not even realize that there were messages in there. But they used more condoms, they went more for HIV testing, there was less gender-based violence, and so on. So, yeah, I'm a strong believer that we have to think through what motivates people, how can we appeal to them, and that's not always a rational thing. I mean, we have some rational parts in our brain, but a lot of what we do is not rational. I mean,
So you came up with the strategy also, like the whole strategy of how to approach this idea?
yes and no. I mean, I how to do it. I'm not I'm not competent, but I was convinced we have to see what are young people doing, and in today's world that's different. I mean, maybe it's TikTok, it's whatever it is. I'm so, and that's the same thing for promoting. Is it vaccines or condoms or so, for example? In many places you have in the evening these small stalls that are selling beer and Coca-Cola and cigarettes and what have you, women who make a bit of money with that. Okay, what the so-called social marketing, we add, well, condoms, contraceptives, social goods, and that spreads, it's better for marketing than the official challenge.
Absolutely.
True.
No,
Yeah, so
we're a firm believer in
that's my thinking.
Mhm.
I'm very strong interest in innovation. So, like, new drugs, new vaccines, and so the technology, AI, I'm very passionate about that. But I'm also interested in innovation in what I call delivery, in how to bring it to people, um, and that is different from one culture to another. In some culture, radio is very, very important. In others, it's images. Uh, I don't pretend I know what it is, but you have to examine. Yeah, so that's why in on an academic side, social scientists and people from the arts movement are as important as doctors, and in the old days, like journalists and entertainers, we had campaigns with I don't know, Ronaldo when he was a star, and that was some campaigns, and with singers, but what I've learned also, there are really no universal role models. Doesn't exist. You have to see what is someone who's famous in, let's say, in India, 1.4 billion people, they've never heard of in Belgium or in the US, and vice versa. So that's why it's so important to, when you deal with something, that you have a diverse team of people who come from different cultures, and they can then say, okay, we need to do that. And in some cultures, it's football. In others, it's cricket, or it's, I don't know what. I mean, I don't know. I personally don't care as long as it works and we find and we reach the people. And it's about saving lives.
Yes, exactly. Peter, we're almost at the end of our conversation.
Hola.
It goes
Yeah,
fast.
it goes fast, you know. We talked about entertainment and entertainment as a communication tool. And music for us is a very strong medium to communicate and to tell a story. And for us, it's a strong identity. And so what we did is we made a music idea for you, which you can find if you click in the link in the comments.
Yeah, okay. Should I do that now?
Yeah, you can do that now.
You can listen. It's 1 minute.
Clara presenteert.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs.
After listening to this, what role does music play in your life, and how does it contribute to your daily life, your profession, and the person that you've become?
First, let me say I'm very moved by it, and and on the other, it gives me a lot of joy. I think that summarizes it. I have, as you can hear, I have a quite eclectic taste, and most of the day I like silence. I mean, but not really absolute silence, because that's part of torture. But
Yeah.
There
Also,
is
since
where you go
there
and
is no
say-
absolute silence. It doesn't exist unless you need to be in a very isolated room. But even then,
Exactly.
like you said, it will drive you completely mad.
Yeah. No, but it's the sounds of nature on the one hand. So that's most of the day. You record this in a corner, and I see on green, and I see birds at the moment and so on. But I love dancing, and but that's I learned that in Kinshasa. So that's when you know my style. So it depends on the time and the day, and I've played a bit in a band and so on. I think music is music plus for me is associated with that is often moving. It brings out something that I can't explain, but also connect you with some people. But it gives you joy. But if I really want to relax and so on, then I'd rather sit in the forest and do. And like I go jogging in the Soniumwoud. I love that because what you hear is a bird and the wind in the trees. But also, for example, I love Bob Marley also, not only for the music, but also for what the words and so on. And actually, when I think of it, I learned English by that way in my generation. So I once spoke at the BBC has this series Desert Island Disc, and it's people who you can choose 8 discs because it started in 1943, I think, and continues every single week. It's the most popular program, and and you have to play music that and something in your life. And one was, I said, like a Rolling Stone. I said, because I learned English with that, and said, oh yeah, is this English? But it's true. I mean, but it's also like Bob Dylan. I am very fond of because of the messages. At the moment, I think one of the biggest singers is Stromae. And it's the music, but it's also the the words, the messages, and I love it that Bob Dylan got the Nobel Prize for literature. It's a very, and that's why, example, I've addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations several times, with all the prime ministers, every country in the world there. And once I said, let me quote a famous Caribbean poet. A silence. I said, Bob Marley. I think is probably the first time his name was mentioned in that August assembly. And I mean it because I have his records and his songs, and also Bob Dylan, also from Leonard Cohen. These are, they express things that I could not express that way, but appeal to me.
And what was that specific quote?
The quote of the General Assembly was, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, also from Redemption Song.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And, that's because I think that's a big issue. It's you can't always accuse others. So sometimes, we have internalized so much things. I mean, that's whether that's racism or women or whatever, that's or just our education. So you have to, yes, get it out. So I'm a strong believer. It's supporting young people, and my approach is often, it's in you. Let's make sure it gets out there.
Yep.
And that means also you have to dare. You have to take a risk. You have to go for it. And then, yes, we can. That's the approach that I would take.
Very beautiful.
Yes, we can. Maybe one last question, because we're all in our 30s now. And you feel like there's still a long way to go. But if you look back on your 30s, you already made some groundbreaking discoveries. What did you learn there that has made the man you are today?
30s, I have to think, when was this? The 80s. Yeah, that for me, these were the times that I spent quite some time both in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Kinshasa. And that was, on the one hand, from a scientific curiosity perspective, very exciting, because we were discovering new things all the time. But at the same time, I also saw the damage that it did was doing to people, and so for me that was quite a struggle. I'm privileged and I do these things. I'm not someone who would feel guilty because I'm a white man. That's not my thing. But I feel with everybody, and I try to make sure that everybody has equal chances, and that came out there. But it was also I think I grew then into leadership position or mentality. So I, without fighting for it, but I found myself often at the forefront, and then I look back, there was nobody behind me. So okay, then we go for it, and then we go further. And sometimes I wish I would have thought a bit more about what to do, but I'm someone, as we say, do well and zie niet om. Go for it and do it, and sometimes I'd rather take the risk and then afterwards apologize that I did something wrong than that just sit there and not do it.
Yeah. Ask
If
for
you have
forgiveness, not for permission, right?
Yes, exactly. If you have, particularly, I mean, and I think it's in every single field. And look at the world today. I mean, what's going on? It's not so fun. So we have to take up a responsibility and doing it. But just sitting there, or only thinking of yourself and have a great time, which I enjoy time. I mentioned I knew my way in Matonge. I was driving myself. There's no problem. But at the same time, I think that we need to make sure that we're part of the community. We give also to others, and then together. So for me, that's a strong feeling. And I consider myself very lucky that I had the opportunity to do these things. But I think sometimes that people have opportunities come, the doors open, but then we hesitate. I usually jumped into it, but as I repeated, I'm not a risk taker for many things. For that, I am, I each age has its great moments, and I never thought I would get so old as I'm now, 76. I couldn't imagine. Oh boy, that's like.
Yeah.
Well, in your field, that's understandable. I mean, you.
But now I'm happy, and I'm also healthy, so that's touch wood. As I said, I go jogging. Either I go swimming or I jog and take maybe better care of myself. When I was in my 30s, I didn't do that.
Well, yeah, that's how it goes.
No, but also it's a combination of carpe diem. Enjoy every single day of your life, because tomorrow can be the end. Because I've seen so many people die, including from my age, because of my being a doctor. But also, have contribute to others, and also have the longer term view. And I feel that I'm very busy. I did not retire at 65, but I did something. I'm no longer in charge. I think that's for young people, but I give advice. As long as they ask me, if I become a nuisance, I stop. But and the advantage is also I have an enormous network in the world, and can bring people together and hope. And I do mentor quite a few people of your age, and
It's good.
and
Very
that
good.
I also enjoy, because maybe the thing I'm most proud of is that many people who worked with me or trained with me are now in top positions, and it's whether it's in Belgium or
Around the world.
particularly from Africa, from parts of Asia, in the US, and that gives me enormous pride, and it's, of course, they did it, but I feel that sometimes I gave them opportunities so that they could emancipate themselves, that and do the things which I feel I always had to fight for it. But fighting is large.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Peter, for taking again the
Yeah.
time to talk to us.
Yes.
We really
No, pleasure.
appreciate you. Hopefully you can add many more years to your career and find new viruses, but hopefully no pandemics. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. No. At the moment, I'm busy with trying to limit the damage of the new U.S. administration. I can
Yes.
what they're doing, and that's
That's another topic.
yes. Okay. Thank you. Take
Thank you
care.
very
Bye.
much, Peter.
Okay.
Bye.